direct the International Security Program here at CSIS, and I also am pleased to be the head of the Smart Women, Smart Power initiative here. We're so glad that you were able to brave the cold to join us for this event with Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker. We expect a very wonderful conversation about free trade, innovation, technology, and jobs. Quick reminder to follow us, please, on Twitter. We're at Smart Women. And be sure to check out our Smart Women podcast, which Apple named one of the best of 2015, and our Smart Women iTunes U course. If you're live tweeting this event, and we hope that you are, please also think about throwing in the hashtags at SWSP, and at CSIS Live. Now, just quickly on safety housekeeping, in the extremely rare case of an emergency, please just follow my instructions. If something happens in the front of our building, we go out the back to National Geographic, which is just across the way. And if something happens in the back, we go out the front doors. Our Smart Women, Smart Power series wouldn't be possible without the support of Citi. Thank you so much to Citi for helping us to amplify the voices of women in foreign policy, national security, and international business. And with that, please join me in welcoming Kristen Solheim, who is the Director of Federal Government Affairs at Citi.
Hi, thanks for being here. Thank you, Dr. Hicks. And thanks for joining us in the last of the 2016 series, Smart Women, Smart Power. On behalf of all of us at Citi, it's been an honor to sponsor this series, and today's guest, Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker, is a perfect way to end the year. As many of you know, President Obama appointed Secretary Pritzker in 2013 after trying to get her to join his administration in 2009 to help lead the administration's efforts to expand economic growth, ensure businesses have the tools they need to thrive in the 21st century. From international trade to cybersecurity to job creation, Secretary Pritzker has played a major role in helping shape our economy's economic rebound and putting us on more solid footing for the future. Throughout her career, Secretary Pritzker has proven herself to be a civic leader, a true philanthropist, and one of the country's most prolific entrepreneurs. As we are grateful to have her join us here and talk firsthand about her time at the department, in the Obama White House, her distinguished career, and what lies ahead. Citi is a global bank with operations in more than 100 countries, and like everyone, we're watching the moves of the incoming Trump administration and what that means for trade and our place in the global economy. It's a fascinating time to have the Secretary here, and there's no better person to moderate this fascinating discussion than Nina Easton. Thank you very much for being here.
So thanks very much, Kristen. Again, thank you to Citi for your support. Secretary Pritzker took office in June of 2013 and has spent her time as the country's chief commercial advocate, working closely with the nation's businesses and promoting trade and investment in the United States. She developed the Open for Business agenda, a policy blueprint and strategic guide to activities of the Commerce Department's 12 bureaus. She also expanded the foreign commercial service presence worldwide. She spent 27 years in the private sector, starting 5 companies and leading dozens of other businesses. She was CEO of PSP Capital Partners and has served on the boards of a number of major corporations, including Hyatt Hotels and the William Wrigley Company. As always, our moderator tonight is CSIS Senior Associate Nina Easton. She's also chair of Fortune's Most Powerful Women International Summit and the co-chair of the Fortune Global Forum. Again, thank you all for joining us, and over to Nina.
We have a lot to cover. We're going to jump right in. We're going to travel the world and delve into these timely subjects like globalization. But I need to warn you, if you do stay to the very end, Penny might give us a little bit of hint as to what she's going to do next. So Secretary Pritzker, I want to just start with an area of the world where you have an ancestry and a linkage, which is the Ukraine. Russia's in the news. There's a lot of concern about where this next administration is going on that front. What are you hearing out of the Ukraine in that part of the world right now?
Well, I was in Ukraine the end of September, and our work continues there. We at the department have been very involved with them in helping them really transform their economy to really, their whole anti-corruption efforts and the effort to make their economy more palatable to the West. What we're hearing, look, what we've said to them is you need to continue to move that agenda forward in order for the next administration. We said this before there was an election, before the next administration comes in, because unless you're showing progress and continuing to move forward, it's a lot for the United States to stay, engaged and to be a strong partner in Ukraine. And that's been an impetus for positive movement. Obviously there's been a lot of impetus for positive movement over the last 2 years, but it's a complicated place, and they should be, they're concerned because we, and particularly the Vice President and the President, have been a really consistent partner and stalwart for Ukraine. And certainly the question that's got to be going through their mind is, are the sanctions going to hold or not? They're holding now, but how will that change in a new administration? And that's anybody's guess right now.
And what would things look like if the sanctions came off?
Well, first of all, that would, in essence, the message to Russia would be, you've invaded Ukraine, you invaded Crimea, you are active in the Donbass, and you paid a price for a while, but not, the purpose of sanctions is to get them to change their behavior. Yeah. And the problem with the message of removing sanctions is it's a message of, just wait us out and it'll all be okay.
Right, and so
there's real consequence, I think, of changing the position that we have, but there'll be a new administration, we'll see.
And on a personal note, do you, what was your great-grandparents were from?
My great-grandparents.
Kiev? Tell everybody your linkage there and what that's been like for you.
My great-grandfather was the immigrant of my family, and he ended up in Chicago. And when I, as secretary, went back to Ukraine, I mentioned to the President Poroshenko, that my family had immigrated from Ukraine, and that's a bad thing. We were talking about corruption and about all the problems that they had in their government, and I said, you need to change your government. You don't want families like mine immigrating. Now, obviously, it was a very long time ago, and you want to keep your talent. It's really important, and the way to do that is to change. Anyway, long story short, I've done 3 trips to Ukraine since I've been secretary. On my second trip, President Poroshenko's wife and I went to the village where my family had lived. And then we took a half a day, and we went from there to where my family ended up moving from a small village to a little bit bigger town, and then to outside of Kyiv. Jews were not allowed to live in Kyiv at the time. It was part of Russia, and then they immigrated because of the pogroms that occurred after the assassination of Tsar Nicholas. So anyway, because there was the rumor that there was a Jew who had killed the Tsar. It was not a fact, but it was a rumor, and that led to the pogroms. So my family left. But anyway, it's given me this really incredible tie to the country. And then our president asked me then at the 75th memorial of Babin Yar, where 33,000 Jews were killed in 48 hours by the Nazis in Kyiv, to lead the presidential delegation and to be the spokesperson for the United States there. And that was just another extraordinary way to engage with a country. So you're working with a country on the one hand on their economic policy, but the second is you're finding, establishing a connection. It always helps to develop trust and build relationships. And so it's been, it's been pretty extraordinary to think that my great-grandfather immigrated with nothing, and I get to return as Secretary of Commerce.
It must have been very powerful.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
And all of that. So going back to Russia and that part of the world, any other insights you can give us on how the Baltic states and so forth are looking at this new administration and the approach towards Russia?
Well, I think everybody's waiting to see, how much is, look, if you're a country, you have to have your plan A and your plan B, depending upon what the agenda of the United States is. The concern is if we don't remain steadfast and, committed to NATO, as well as steadfast in our support of Ukraine, that sends a signal to a lot of other countries in that area. You can't rely on the United States. And that's a problem because those countries are, the first line of defense, if you think about it. And so it's extremely important that we're not volatile in our behavior. I worry, to take another issue, I worry about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and walking away from trade in Asia. I worry about that from an economic standpoint as well as from a geopolitical standpoint, because that's leaving a vacuum for China, that China is filling that void right now.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because trade is a huge, you were at the forefront of all of these trends, globalization and trade, that a lot of voters around the world are rejecting. You talked about the TPP. Where do you see that going, and how is China filling the void?
Well, let's step back and create some perspective here. We're sitting today with an economy where we have 4.6% unemployment. The economy and the private sector's created 15.6 million jobs, and we've created 800,000 manufacturing jobs. We have the lowest number of people who are uninsured that we've had in our history, and our carbon emissions are down. And the reason I say that is, let's just look at our own economy first and the stability that we've got here. And the first thing we want to make sure is we do no harm. The second thing is, how do we create opportunity to continue to grow? And there are 95% of customers and consumers are outside the United States. The fastest growing middle class is in the Asia Pacific region. That's why our administration was focused on a trade deal with the Asia Pacific, is we need a way. Right now, we face all kinds of market access problems. We have e-commerce challenges, data localization challenges, no labor standards, no environmental standards, very difficult to enforce trade the way we do trade in the United States, because we don't have trade, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and also 18,000 tariffs that were going to go away if we pass the Trans-Pacific Pacific Partnership. So my concern, we, post-election, Congress decides not going to pursue this. And so at APEC, China arrived at APEC and basically said, we're going to pursue a multilateral trade agreement, and the purpose is we're going to keep the United States out. That is not good for American workers. That is not good for the American economy. That is not good for American power. And we have to remember, trade agreements are how we shape trade. And our companies, large and small, particularly with the digital economy, need the capacity and access into these markets. And so this is a real challenge. Now, I don't know what the new administration is going to do. All I know is they don't like what we did.
So, walking away from TPP essentially, as you say, strengthens China's economic hand. And that message hasn't gotten out.
No,
politically.
And I think that in the soundbite world that we live in, the problem is that I think what the election has told us is there's a lot of people that are unhappy. Even though I just listed for you all the good things about our economy, there's a lot of people that are feeling uncertain and anxious. And if that isn't the message you got, you weren't listening to the American people. And so then what is going on? Why is that the case? Because the idea that we're going to sell our goods outside the United States, that's not a bad thing. That's good for the American worker. So what's going on? I think it really has to do with globalization and digitization and automation. And that's creating a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. And what do I mean by that? So globalization, really, the fact that the world is interconnected. We sell and buy goods from all over the world and to all over the world. That's a fact that hopefully is not going to change. Hopefully we don't end up in a trade war. That would be bad for the United States and Americans, as well as it would be bad for our trading partners. And I'll tell you what, they're concerned right now. I've had both the Chinese and the Mexicans personally ask me, do you think we're going to end up in a trade war? And oh, by the way, you put up big tariffs and we're going to have to retaliate, and then we all talk about the spiral down. And it's a very professional conversation. It's not a threatening one.
Right.
It's just like, is that really where we're going?
So what do you say? So you've gotten calls right at post-election calls
And
from
meetings.
China and
I
meetings.
met with these people face to face, and I said, look, I said, first of all, you know, in certain instances, I said, you need to understand the American people have spoken that they're feeling uncomfortable and they don't think they're getting a fair deal.
Okay.
And I said, so we've got to step back and ask ourselves, what does that mean? What's the part the American government can do? And then I say to them, and what is it that you can do where Americans feel it's more fair? Because they've spoken. They don't feel like they're getting a fair deal. And you know, I think that depends on who you're talking to, how they react to that. But, you know, what can our government do? I think that we have to step back and say, you know, we have 16 or 17% of working Americans today work, you know, on an in-demand economy. Those folks are asking themselves, where's my safety net? What kind of, you know, retirement savings am I going to have? Do I have health care? Am I going to have health care or not? You know, with Obamacare, we've covered 20 million more people. There's a lot of rhetoric about let's get rid of that.
Right.
But there's a lot of people, I'll bet every one of you have relatives or someone you know who's got health insurance because of Obamacare. Do we really want to get rid of that? Maybe we need to improve it or change it, but let's ask ourselves, do we want to uninsure 20 million Americans? So there's things I think we need to think about. The jobs are changing. Automation and digitization is changing the nature of work. Today I heard a statistic, something like in the last 10 or 15 years, we've lost 7.6 million jobs for people who do not have a high school degree.
Yeah.
So the point is, you know, there's a lot of people who this economy, but then we're creating jobs in a middle-skilled economy that requires digital fluency at a very rapid rate, and we don't have the people to fill those jobs. So there's a disconnect, and the people who are feeling insecure are not able to bridge into these opportunities. We have to figure that out. But we also have to, you know, I think, agreements with other countries where Americans feel like they're getting a fair deal. We thought we had negotiated that in TPP. I think, frankly, we have done a lot of the work. I think there's, you know, you can change some terms or whatever, but I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and I certainly wouldn't turn my back on the Asia Pacific. I think that's a disaster for the American economy and American workers.
Let's drill down a bit on both China and Mexico. China, you know, where would you say to China, the American people actually have a point. We're getting a raw deal here.
Well, for example, steel. Let's take steel, aluminum, and soda ash. But I'll start with steel. Steel, you know, we have, the Department of Commerce does anti-dumping and countervailing duties. Not a very exciting or interesting thing to think about. But if you dump your product at below market cost, because it's subsidized in your country, here in the United States, we put a tariff on it and a duty on it. We have the most outstanding anti-dumping cases in the last 20 years right now. Our staffs are taxed. We've had to add dozens and dozens of people. And it's well known that China is dumping steel. To give you an idea, I'll just give you some numbers. I'm a numbers person. China consumes about 800 million metric tons of steel a year. They produce about 1.2 billion metric tons of steel a year. The United States produces less than 100 million metric tons of steel a year. So China has 400 million extra that they're making, and they're trying to dump all over the world. And all we make is 100 million. We consume about 120 million metric tons. So we do import some certain types of steel. But our steel industry is efficient, and it's also environmentally has reformed itself to be, you know, environmentally cognizant, versus the steel industry in China is, you know, belching on coal, if you will. And you say to these guys, hey guys, you don't even consume You're producing 50% more than what you consume, and you're dumping it all over the world. This isn't just an American problem. This is a problem for Mexico. It's a problem for countries all over the world. I say to them, look, and you're putting our workers out of jobs. That's not fair. It's one thing if you're producing something the world wants and needs. It's another thing to just dump it, and we're putting tariffs all over you, and you're hurting our industry. We closed 6, same's true in aluminum, closed 6 aluminum plants this year. I'll bet you those people did not vote to say, geez, can't wait to do trade with China. So that's
a really
problem.
good example. And then Mexico. What about NAFTA? I mean, all the research I've read shows that NAFTA actually was a net benefit to the United States.
Absolutely.
You still?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I was in Mexico last week. I met with the president. I met with his senior leadership team. And I also met with the CEO, the Mexican U.S. CEO group forum that's leaders from the United States and Mexico. And I basically said, well, let's set the record straight. NAFTA was good for us, and it created stability, created jobs. It's been net benefit for both of our economies. But NAFTA is a 22-year-old agreement. TPP was a renegotiation of NAFTA. It addressed labor standards, enforceable labor standards in Mexico. Mexico is changing its constitution because of TPP to improve, to live by international labor standards. Environmental standards, not enforceable in NAFTA, enforceable in TPP. So you can't compete by raping your environment, if you will. Small and medium-sized enterprise. There's a chapter in TPP that says, look, you've got to have very clear customs, very clear taxes. You've got to, make access for our logistics companies. So think UPS and FedEx and DHS and other companies. So think of small and medium-sized businesses. The biggest challenge they have, and then data, e-commerce. There was no e-commerce 22 years ago. But for small and medium-sized business to do business around the world, they have to be able to use the internet. They can't be forced to, store their information in that country. They don't have the money for that. They need to be able to use logistics companies to get their goods there and and they need e-payment. And so, electronic signatures is part of TPP. So, and the Mexican president was very clear, and he said, look, we can do enhancements to NAFTA. That's fine. We'll figure that out with the United States and Mexico and Canada. But the point is that it was the group making access to the Asia Pacific that gave you access to markets like Japan and and Vietnam and Malaysia. Markets today where our goods face 30, 40, 70% tariffs.
It's interesting because NAFTA, of course, passed by a hair in the early 90s. I mean, there was a huge opposition to free trade going way back. And so it really hasn't changed.
Look, from a political standpoint, and I've been here 3.5 years. I've learned a lot, but it wasn't where I came from. When I first arrived, I sat with Josh Bolton, the former chief of staff, and U.S. trade rep before that. And I said, and he brought together a group of Democrats and Republicans. And we sat down and I said, tell me how this happens. How do you do a trade agreement? I'm not the U.S. trade rep, but obviously Department of Commerce we have enormous, we work right alongside the U.S. trade rep to get these things done. I said, how does this happen? He said, every trade deal is by one vote. It's going to be politically difficult. He said, it doesn't mean people don't want it. It's just, it's a politically hard because some company in somebody's district is going to close because of some trade deal.
Right.
What they're not looking at is the net benefit to the whole country.
Right.
And that's hard. So you've also got to have some kind of provision to help those people who might lose their job because of trade. But, and we have to address whether what we have, which is called trade adjustment assistance, obviously people didn't feel that was sufficient.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point being, it's always been hard.
Right.
Every trade deal, whether it's Colombia or Peru or Korea or NAFTA, they're hard to get done. So you have to assume you're going to get it done by one vote. Nobody who doesn't want to take the vote is going to take the vote,
Right.
who doesn't have to take the vote. So that's, I think, part of, trade deals are just hard politically to get done.
So I should have mentioned there are cards that people can write questions on, correct? I believe, and pass them on, and we will take questions from the audience in a short while. You've spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley. I've spent time with you spending time in Silicon Valley. We saw tech leaders meeting with Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, yesterday. What do you think that relationship is going to be like? Where's the area of agreement and the areas of disagreement?
I don't exactly know, but I think that a couple of things that I would say. Brad Smith was in that room yesterday. Brad Smith sits on our Digital Economy Board of Advisors, and we had our meeting today, so he was here. What he reported is when we threw out ideas, they were very receptive. But, there's often a process by which things occur in government, and so it's interesting to have that high-level conversation, it sets a tone, but at some point you've got to actually have the function of government work to get things done. What we've tried to do for the next administration is put in place tools so that the government can more easily engage with the digital economy. Now, what do I mean by that? So first of all, we've created a Digital Economy Board of Advisors that just put forth a plan, a blueprint for the next administration. Here are the things that we'd like to see done. Measurements so that we can better measure the digital economy. A workforce, what are we going to do to engage, to have the kind of workforce that's necessary for our companies to be able to thrive here in the United States, create jobs here in the United States. Because the challenge is they're struggling to find the workers they need. And then, we need an industrial Internet of Things policy. So it goes into a lot more detail, but that's the kind of advice. So we put in place advisory from the private sector, both in the digital economy and for data, right? The second thing that we've done is we've created people in the organization and a policy apparatus to work on behalf of the government and on behalf of the next administration to deal with issues like free and open internet. The internet is at risk, and it's really important that we, the United States, are fighting for a free and open internet for trade purposes because so much of our economy depends on that. Access to broadband, another issue. Third is trust online. We can only have online if privacy, security, encryption, those issues need to be dealt with. And we're trying to figure out what's the balance of privacy versus convenience. How do we deal with cybersecurity? So the president created the Cybersecurity Commission that put out their report. It's a blueprint for the next administration on how to deal with the absolutely immense threat we face in cybersecurity.
Which we saw this week with the Yahoo,
but
for example.
also our own election.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just companies. It's also the government and it's our own election. And so this is a very important area. So what we've tried to do is bridge and create the opportunity for the next administration to engage both with the leaders on policy issues, to have careers in place that can help them to address those issues. The other thing we've done, for example, is we've created digital attaches. So if you're a company and you want to sell digital products around the world, we now have attaches in the ASEAN countries and 11 other markets, China, India, Brazil, and I could go on, Mexico, Germany, et cetera. where we've got folks positioned to help your company sell and navigate the digital policies in those different countries. So we've built the bridges. The question is, you're going to use those bridges. And that's a decision that's a decision by that administration.
And if somebody wants a digital handholder, how do they find them? What is the
What digital?
if you want to sell overseas and use your digital
if you want a
assistance at the
digital
Commerce
attaché,
Secretary?
it's our
Attaché.
International Trade Administration. Call the Department of Commerce. Go online and say Digital Attaché, International Trade Administration, or Department of Commerce, and or call my office, and
Good
we'll
for
get
people
you
to know,
these
yeah.
people to help you. So we've done a lot to try and make it. We've got, the other thing we've done on data, which is, the Department of Commerce is America's data agency.
Mm-hmm.
We produce 20 to 40 terabytes of data a day at the Department of Commerce. That's 2 to 4 libraries of Congress a day, of demographic data, sense of weather data, of patent and trademark data, on and on. And so what we've tried to do is make more of our data accessible and usable. And we created in the Department of Commerce something called the Commerce Data Service that takes our data and works with the private sector to combine our data to improve the information we're putting out, to improve government decision making, to create APIs or make our bulk data more easily accessible and usable. It's exciting what's happening. That's really...
And as an example, just to draw, NOAA is part of commerce, correct?
Absolutely.
And so that's weather data. Just sort of give us an example of how you use that. Yeah.
So, for example, if you think about, weather data, the United States government we're the satellites, the buoys, and the sensors combined with computing power and algorithms that produce basic weather information. Then the Weather Channel or your local weather station or other vehicles will then take our information and get it out to the public. We're also working, though, closely with FEMA and others on extreme weather. We've changed so that we call it a weather-ready nation is what we're trying to be. But the point being, how do you save property and lives by getting more timely information out to people, to mayors, to governors, to first responders, so that, let's say, if you knew a hurricane's going in this direction, how do you put generators over here, not in the path of the hurricane, so that you can come in quickly to help people? That's what I mean by improving the use of our information as it relates to the weather. Drought.
Yeah.
We run the water center. So we monitor drought and flooding so that we can warn, save people, save property.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit more about cybersecurity. What worries you most? How far have we come, and what worries you most right now?
Well, let me start with democracy. And, we cannot have it be that there's a question about the efficacy of our elections. And we cannot have it, and I'm not making a partisan statement.
Right.
I'm making a statement about,
A country that intelligence agencies say hacked into
right, and
our political parties.
And so that's cybersecurity. That is a huge problem. And then releasing data as you feel like it. And that's scary. So we've all been hacked. I mean, with the Yahoo and 1 billion accounts, that's a lot of people, last time I checked, and a lot of information, and a lot of sensitive information. So what have we done about it, and what do we need to do about it? Cybersecurity Commission, which is led by Tom Donnellan and Sam Palmisano. And if you haven't seen the Charlie Rose thing they did, that was really good. It was really great. But basically, the Cybersecurity Commission, which we at the Department of Commerce, we were a huge part of supporting that effort. It was 12 people who came together to really lay down a blueprint for the country. And highlight 3 things that they recommended. First is we need new structures for collaboration between industry and government, because if you think about cybersecurity, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So for example, the hack into Target, you know, all those Target accounts, 80 million or something like that, was through the HVAC vendor, right?
Way
So,
downstream.
Way downstream and way far apart from...
Your air conditioning guy, basically,
Exactly.
was responsible.
Exactly. They went in through the air conditioning guy and got to all those accounts. So we're completely intertwined, and we need to work with the private sector and collaborate as government in order to address cybersecurity. So we're only as strong as our weakest link. We need new structures for that. So this commission calls for a board to be created, but also legal liability. If I volunteer to come forward and you're my regulator and tell you that I've been hacked, I don't want to then be at, you know, penalized for collaborating.
Which is what a lot of CEOs are concerned about, that they
Absolutely.
can't share information about these hacks because they're worried about
Right.
shareholder lawsuits.
And the right now, the law that was created a year and a half ago says you don't have liability if you're critical infrastructure. Well, if I'm Target, I don't want to be critical infrastructure. So I'm not protected by that problem. A second is workforce. We don't have the workforce we need. We need about 200,000 cybersecurity workers to help us address this problem across the country and in government. That's the second recommendation. A third is the Internet of Things. You saw the shutdown of a number of websites because of the infiltration of Dyn. Who'd ever heard of Dyn, right? And how did they do it? They basically turned, you know, basic appliances and things into blockers that sent, you know, that overwhelmed the system. And that's using your things. And we're all now networked, right? Everything's networked. If you're a police car, you're networked. If you're an IV, you know, often those are networked, you know, in a hospital. So we have to find a way to make sure that the Internet of Things is born secure and stays secure. Lots of recommendations about that. My point being, this is probably the #1 threat to the United States.
Agreed. One topic we haven't covered, and I'm glad this was raised, is Brexit. How is that affecting transatlantic economic relations? And I'm also curious what you're hearing from American businesses as they watch this play out. Are they going to be leaving London? What kind of strategic decisions are they wrestling with?
Well, I think first the problem is right now with the lack of clarity as to when and how Brexit is going to be implemented. Decisions are not being made. Mm-hmm. Investments are not being made. Hirings are not occurring in the UK. And so that's a problem for the UK and their economy, and they're an important ally of ours, so we need them to stay strong. They've said they want to break away from, they're going to have to renegotiate, by having Brexit, they're going to have to renegotiate a trade agreement with the EU. That is, first, they haven't had the people to do that. They haven't negotiated trade agreements in 40 years. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is going to take a long time. And it's going to be complicated. Think of how complicated it was to negotiate TPP, to renegotiate a trade deal with the EU. And remember, the EU has come out and said, I'm not telling you anything that's not public, and said, we're not pre-negotiating, we're not having anything, you know, set aside. And we got to be tough, because the EU's in a position, they don't want to lose more countries, so they don't want to encourage people to leave the EU. So this is a real challenge.
And it seems like a career opportunity for international lawyers.
It is.
All of you aspiring
it's a
law
big
students.
career opportunity. It's a problem, though, for the United States, because the UK has been a strong ally and an important voice in the EU. That voice is now diminished because they're in the process of pulling away, and that affects, you know, that has implications for the U.S.
And again, American companies, what do you think? They're just in limbo. They're just not
Well,
making
you
decisions.
can't be in limbo, totally in limbo. So, I have heard some companies are around shopping. Where in the EU, where in the EU should I go, and will you make it more exciting for me to be in your country versus the UK? I've also, what are the financial services companies going to do? Their challenge is that their business is predominantly in English. Many of their workers don't want to go and be in Germany or France or some other country. Not because I have nothing against any of those countries, but that's an issue to be faced. So it's a big challenge and a big unknown that doesn't seem priced into the market to me.
So another good question here, since this person doesn't want to be an international lawyer apparently, what skills should college students learn to be competitive in the new growing economy, or in this disconnected economy where you have, steel workers laid off, as you said, but jobs go lacking in other parts of the sector?
I think being digitally fluent, and I'm probably not the right person to define exactly what digitally fluent is, but being digitally fluent is really critical. I think being flexible because jobs are changing. I think companies are waking up to the fact they have to spend more on training, but what they want is people that are capable of learning. So the other thing I would say is you've got to be really open to being a lifelong learner and adapting, because we're no longer, the day of going to work at a company and staying for 40 years is just not the reality anymore. And so that means you've got to really be strategic about, and I think having a STEM base in your training is really going to be more and more critical.
I've also heard companies say, yes, STEM based, but also learning communication skills and literature.
Absolutely.
And don't lose the other stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I look, I'll take an overachiever any day of the week, but you want someone who's well-rounded, who can, is not too angular.
Right.
At least I would say that as having been from my private sector life. You need experts in certain things. I think having a strong STEM base, but a strong base in communications. And I have to tell you, I don't know who's teaching writing these days, but people can't write. It's awful. It's really a problem. And communication is absolutely critical to success.
And I think the lack of writing is probably because of the lack of reading, because everybody's attention span, especially among younger people, is shortening. This is a related question. For a young woman looking to go into international business or international affairs, what's your best advice to make positive change and find success? And then secondly, what is the most important thing that you've learned in your career?
Oh my God. Well, let me do the latter part. I think that recognizing a couple of things. First of all, I have yet to have a job that isn't a part of a team. I've yet to work on anything where it's a solo sport. It's basically, whether it's government or in the private sector, it's a team effort. And so learning to be a good teammate, learning to be reliable teammate, learning to, and as a leader, to know what you're good at and know what you're not good at, and surround yourself with people who are good at the things you're not good at, and listen to them. Being a good listener, I think, is really critical. And bringing humility, and yet finding your voice. I think for young women, finding their voice is really important. Because you can go too long and be too comfortable being the person taking notes and in the background, and not figuring out how you can be heard. Because the truth of the matter is, more often than not, when you're working on something, there's a lot of bad ideas and that get thrown out. And so, figuring out the path forward is often a process of elimination. There's good ideas, there's pieces of ideas, so finding your voice, being in the game, and being reliable, a reliable contributor, I think all of which are really important. And communication is absolutely essential.
Recent Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit, the advice kept coming up, and we were talking about this at one of our luncheons. advice to young women: be relevant. Don't be that nice young woman, as you say, taking notes in the background. Be relevant and have a voice.
Yeah,
So,
and and it means you have to prepare.
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people, I'll tell you what I think one of the things, I prepare. You may not ask me the questions we agree to, but I prepared. And you know what, for me, I would say, prepare. It will give you confidence, even if what you talk about is totally different than what you expected.
Here's a question we didn't agree to. Have you met your successor, Wilbur Ross?
I have not. We're in contact with one another and trying to schedule a meeting. So we're.
And this is actually related to a question somebody raised. How do you expect the Trump administration to deal with commerce functions, the census, NOAA, et cetera?
What I've said to I'll answer the question because I can't speak for their administration. I don't know, and I don't have any good or bad view, except their transition team is in, and they seem very diligent and working hard. So, that sends a good signal. And we haven't been asked for any lists of people who went to certain conferences. So, no, that scares the bejesus out of people. It's unnecessary. But what I've told the folks who work at Commerce is, you're the experts. You know what we do. We help people. I said, don't forget what we do. We help companies sell their goods outside the United States, trade, and we help foreign companies do business in the United States because it creates jobs. That's investment. We support innovation, entrepreneurship, advanced manufacturing, the digital economy, workforce. We produce data, and we need to get more of our data out there. And we provide climate intelligence. Those are essential things in the 21st century economy. Do your job.
Right.
Explain to your new leaders what it is you do and how they can help you be successful. That's what I've said. And exactly how they pursue one thing or another is that's America. That's democracy.
Right.
But there's basic functions and services that the department. You need a patent or a trademark. We need the weather.
Right.
We have to do the census according to the Constitution. We should enforce our trade agreements and not let China dump steel. So, there's basic functions that have to go on at the department.
So you were an incredibly successful businesswoman before you came to Commerce, so you've done negotiations. Have you learned something beyond what you learned in the private sector about negotiating? I mean, now that you've been at the table with people like China?
I would say the following things that I've learned. It's a lot more complicated to negotiate in government than it is in the private sector. In the private sector, you're trying to sell something, you're trying to buy something, you're trying to joint venture. In government, a lot of what we're trying to do is to either gain access for our companies, and maybe another country wants that, or they don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to convince them why it's in their best interest, right? It's one of the reasons I believe in commercial diplomacy, which is working side by side with American businesses to convince other countries that if they made their rules where it was easy, because they all want American products, if they made it easier for American companies to do business, anti-corruption, clear customs, easy tax, clarifying your tax law, et cetera, said more American businesses would do business there. And we work alongside American businesses to help explain that. So, let's see.
So apparently we're out of time because you're on a schedule, and I just wanted to say thank you for your service. I think this entire room wants to say thank you for your service. You've been an incredible Commerce Secretary. We wish you the best in Chicago.
Thank you.
And here, I assume, both?
Yeah, I'm going to have some things I'm going to be doing here, and my husband has been for 3.5 years commuting because I said I was all in, and I've been living here. And so time to get the band back in the same place. So the band's getting back together. I love my husband very much, so I'm quite excited about that. So I'll be based out of Chicago, but I don't let grass grow under my feet, so I'll be moving
Yeah, we know
around.
you. Well, let's all give Secretary Pritzker a round of applause. And thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.